Merci, merci à vous tous.
So thank you all very
Merci
much.
de l'intérêt que vous avez porté à
Thank
ce
you
film,
for
à l'évidence.
the interest you showed for the film. Seems pretty
Je
obvious.
voudrais, avant de donner la
So
parole
before giving the floor
à nos invités, je voudrais
to our
juste faire
guests,
deux constatations.
I'd just like to say two things.
D'abord, c'est grâce à l'organisation
Well,
de ce festival qu'on va ce soir avoir une chance assez inouïe.
So it's thanks to the organizer of this festival that we're going to be very incredible luck. We're going to have the main characters of the film we have just seen, and so this is quite a privilege and an honor. And also over Skype we're going to have the presence of Mr. Kiriakou, who's in the United States, and I'd like to thank our guests who are here. And once again, I'd like to say something, and let's think for a few moments. This is not a judgment value. It's actually we have with us the two only individuals from the CIA and the NSA who have reported torture or spying on a massive scale. This is the very first time that you and myself have in front of us people who've actually witnessed, and we have actually their lawyers. So I want you to be really aware of the fact that, once again, I'm not making any judgment. There will be a debate, so it's a fact. We have in front of us, these two individuals who, make history, the history of the United States and also the history of the world. And I think that your very warm round of applause show how much you appreciate them. So we're going to try and have John Kiriakou, who is in a very interesting situation. We'll be able to see and hear him over the Skype. No reason why it shouldn't work, even if we're under some sort of surveillance. Something else has to be said, and something important. And I think we have to be aware of this. John Kiriakou is out of prison, but he hasn't actually served his whole prison sentence. He is what is called under house arrest, which means he's at home, and he has to stay at home, and he can't actually leave his home or outside a certain perimeter. But I'm also told that normally he is not allowed to actually give any interviews. So as a consequence, and again, it's an honor for us to have him with us. So we'll have to understand also that perhaps some he will not perhaps answer some of our questions, and we're certainly not going to embarrass him. And I think we can already thank him for being with us. I hope he is, and so we'll have John Kiriakou with us. John Kiriakou, can you hear us? Can you hear us out there in the United States? Hi, John. Hi, John.
Hi, John. This is, I will be saying this. Lots of people clapping for you. John Kiriakou.
Thank you.
Okay, can you hear the people?
I can.
Okay.
Very touched.
Okay, John Kiriakou, I'll say just this in English just to make sure that you have the translation. Est-ce que vous avez la traduction de ce qui se dit?
Do you have the translation of what is being said in Geneva, yes? Just to be sure that you hear me.
Merci. Alors, vous avez entendu les applaudissements. Ici.
So, you know that we are in Geneva. You heard the warm round of applause. And so, we actually have the weakness of thinking this is the capital for human rights. So you've knocked on the right door, if I can put it that way. And John. So I'm going to immediately ask you one question that's burning on my lips. So in the film, we've discovered, and again, it's a fact. It's not a judgment. We saw all the suffering and all the procedures, the very difficult moments that you experienced. So just one single question to begin. So do you have any regrets for putting yourself in such a situation? Do you regret it?
No, not in any way. No, I would do it again.
But if you had known, the scale it would take, this procedure, this, big machinery, would you have perhaps given it some thought? Would you have actually hesitated in being the whistleblower that you've become now? Would you have hesitated had you known?
The one thing that I would have done differently is I would have called Jesselyn Radack before blowing the whistle on torture rather than after.
Merci. John.
So thank you. John Kiriakou, one more question. And you'll be actually coming in at different moments of this debate with our other guests. So So, we saw in the film that there was sort of, there's a government, sort of like a huge machinery. But do you have, the feeling that public opinion shares that feeling, or that, there is actually, and you feel that there is a certain sympathy for the American citizen that you are? I mean, do people feel sympathetic?
I do actually feel very, very optimistic about the support that I continue to receive, only because now that I'm home, I'm starting to hear about it. You see, we have a problem with the mainstream media in our country, in that the mainstream media really does not cover whistleblower issues. They tend to just ignore those issues, and it's the alternative press that really follows them. So now that I'm home and I'm able to see my friends and colleagues like Jesselyn Radack and Tom Drake and others making their way into the mainstream media and educating American citizens about whistleblower issues, it makes me even happier and more optimistic than I was. I think we're really headed in the right direction on this issue.
Alors, est-ce que si progrès il y a...
So, I mean, if progress there is, it is in the fact that people are better understanding what whistleblowing is about. But, do you feel we're going to, is there, legal recognition and not just this recognition, that dates back to the law of 1989?
No, actually, I think that's a separate issue. And on the issue of legal recognition, I think, if anything, we've moved backward. I really believed, like many of my friends and colleagues did, in the slogan of hope and change that President Obama campaigned on in 2008. I really believed that things were going to get better in our country, especially in the area of human rights. That's turned out to not be true. And really, unfortunately, what we've seen is an extension of the George W. Bush administration for the last 6 years. So I really don't think, at least not with this president, I don't think that we'll see many positive changes.
So in the film, we get the feeling that, you want to talk to him. You said, this is now, between Barack Obama and myself. So if you had him over the phone, whether over Skype, what would you say to him? What would you say?
I would ask him to do the right thing and to pardon me, and not just me, but other whistleblowers. Thomas Drake is in the same situation that I'm in, where he was forced to plead guilty. Even though it was a misdemeanor, he was forced to plead guilty just to make this ridiculous case go away. We have other people now who are even in more dire situations than I was. People like Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning, and now Jeffrey Sterling. And I would say, President Obama, do the right thing, not just for me, but for these other national security whistleblowers. This is going to be his legacy. This is how history is going to view him. Did he do the right thing, or did he ignore the right thing and just do what the Bush administration did?
So, beyond, the prison sentence that is tough, 30 months, what is most hurtful for you, the prison sentence or the fact of being quote unquote guilty? What hurts you most?
The prison sentence actually turned out to be easy. I'm a relatively tough guy, and I was able to make some friends in prison, and really to use the training that I had received over the course of my CIA career to really do well in prison. But it does hurt that sometimes I wake up in the morning and I think to myself, I'm unemployed and I'm just a common criminal. I was a common criminal serving with child molesters and drug dealers and mafia figures, and I'm exactly the same as they are. So some days it's tough waking up and knowing that I'm just another convicted criminal, of which we have so many in the United States.
Et quel regard
So your co-detainees, what was their view on you? Did they know about the story? I mean, how did they feel about you?
Yeah, my story sort of arrived at the prison before I did. And in fact, the day that I arrived, one of the Muslim leaders in the United States, Reverend Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam, he made a statement in the Nation of Islam newspaper saying that I was a hero of Muslim human rights. So on the day that I arrived at the prison, some representatives from the Nation of Islam gang came up to me and told me, Reverend Farrakhan said that you're all right. You don't have to worry about anything from us. And then that gang introduced me to other gangs in the prison, with each gang saying, you're okay with us, you're a human rights activist, you're not going to have any problems. And in fact, I didn't have any problems of any kind with any of the other inmates. My problems came from the prison guards and the prison administrators who tried to stop me from exercising my right to freedom of speech. That was really the only trouble that I had in prison.
Merci, John Kiriakou. Restez avec nous.
Thank you, John Kiriakou. You know, stay with us. Okay, so I'm going to ask a question to Thomas Craig, and the same one, we saw, the dire straits you were in. So in good French, was it all worth it?
Yes, absolutely. Look, it wasn't just me. It was liberty and freedom and human rights, universal human rights that were at stake. I could not remain silent. And so I would do it all over again. But just like John, I would have also contacted Jesselyn Radack a lot sooner.
Quelque part, ce soir.
So, somewhere this evening, because you're in Geneva, I mean, do you have the feeling that there is at least, as we were saying with John Kiriakou, there's been an advancement in the knowledge of whistleblower activities, and so perhaps, don't you feel a certain pride in having contributed to this?
Yes, it does give me some solace. And the other thing, I take great comfort knowing that Snowden showed up. I had always hoped that someone like Snowden, seeing what had happened to me, he having cited my case, but someone like him would bring out the fuller documentation and just how far the United States government unchained itself from the Constitution and the rule of law and universal conventions that it was a signatory on, and absolutely violated with impunity and had done so willfully.
Est-ce que quelque part vous avez finalement une certaine
somewhere,
satisfaction
are you satisfied when you hear people calling you a hero, versus, the huge U.S. machinery? Are you proud of being hero, or is that not what really counts at the end of the day?
No, it doesn't. It just simply, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and I stood up for the sovereign rights of human beings. That's all human beings, not just those who happen to live in the United States.
Alors, je m'adresse maintenant à l'avocate.
So now I'd like to turn to you, a lawyer, one of the best well-known lawyers defending the whistleblowers. So to begin, a very straightforward question. Is it easy to live like us, sending emails, using a cell phone, when one is a very well-known lawyer, as you are, when you defend people who are also very well-known, who are working with the administration? Can you just send emails, make phone calls, not knowing whether you're under surveillance? I mean, in everyday life, tell us about your, without becoming totally paranoid, but, what are the precautions you have to take?
No, absolument no. I feel this is not how I learned how to practice law. I feel like I have to use drug dealer tactics. I have to meet in person, pay in cash, use throwaway cell phones, change my identity and my name when I go certain places. And to communicate with clients, I'm not sending them stuff over email. Luckily, most of the people in the NSA are in Maryland, and most of the people that I represent in the CIA are in Virginia, so we can meet in person. But for clients like Edward Snowden, I have to use very, very, very enhanced forms of encryption that I'm not going to get into.
On vous demande pas vos secrets, hein?
We're not asking you for your secrets, but so you, I mean, do you think that you and I, we're being listened to right now? I mean, do you think someone is listening to us?
At this very moment, given that this whole thing is live streamed, anyone can listen to it. But in general, whether or not the government is actively listening in on me, the fact that I have to worry about that, the fact that I have clients under active surveillance means I have to change my behavior. And when people start changing their behavior because they're afraid that the government might be listening, might be collecting their information, and is definitely storing that information, you've already caused the harm. You've already changed people.
Est-ce que vous avez un minimum
So,
de soutien
do you have a minimum support from your professional organization? I'm thinking of the bar. What about the bar?
The bar has made about one statement in which has said that the government should observe attorney-client privilege, which exists in both of our countries. But the National Security Agency, the GCHQ in the UK, the BND in Germany, they have no carve-out for the attorney-client privilege. The bar could be far more vocal about respecting attorney-client privilege, and I think could be far more vocal about the general war on whistleblowers, on journalists, on hacktivists, and on information, the criminalization of information that our country doesn't like.
Je vous pose la même question qu'à John Kiriakou.
So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked John Kiriakou. I mean, do you make a difference between, the top-level institutions? I mean, you can think what you want, whether you're left, right, Democrat, or Republican. But do you have a feeling that in the public opinion, because that's what counts, the public opinion understands your fight, you as a lawyer? Do you think you're being understood by the public?
I think on a certain level, people are beginning to understand. In terms of the surveillance debate, when I began representing Edward Snowden, the United States was about 60% against him and 40% supporting him, and now that has reversed. But the problem is still that every single debate is called hero or traitor, hero or villain, and it's neither. Whistleblowers, I don't think, want to be heroes because I don't want to think that what I did or what they did is heroic. This is something that I want most people to be able to do, and I believe most people would do. Most people in this room, if you saw an old lady getting mugged, you would call the police, yes? Oui? Yes.
Ça n'arrive jamais à Genève, bien sûr.
But that never happens in Geneva. So again, I'm looking at you, three of you, John Kiriakou, Tom Drake, and Jesselyn Radack. I find, it's incredible. You're smiling, and there's incredible thing. Here you're all very open, smiling, and the suffering that comes through in the film. I mean, do you feel very lonely? I mean, you have a lot of people here, who support you, or at least understand you. But I mean, is it every day like that? I mean, you seem you're smiling, and John, if you want to take that question.
Sure, I had never felt so alone in my life as the day that I was told that I was going to be arrested. I walked out of the FBI's office and I gave very serious consideration to jumping in front of a subway train. And then I thought, no, I can't give them the satisfaction. I'm going to fight them. When I got home, I told my wife, I'm going to embrace this and I'm going to fight because what I did was the right thing and I'm not going to let them beat me. And so we decided to take up the fight. It was because of people like Jesselyn Radack and Tom Drake, really, that I got through this, because they became two of my closest friends and two of my closest advisors. Tom Drake was like a brother to me. And when I felt down, when I felt like I was doubting myself, it was Tom Drake that brought me back into real life again. And I knew that I could carry out this fight. At the end, it was just a question of choosing the path that cost me the least in terms of time in prison away from my family and in terms of money. But I couldn't have gotten through the experience without these friends.
Alors, je vais demander à votre frère, Tom Drake, aussi.
So I'm going to ask your brother, Tom Drake, tell us about the moment where you doubted most and the moment that was the most difficult where you tend to think, God, I've got it all wrong. Tell us about that moment.
I never thought I had it all wrong because I was looking longer term, that history ultimately was on the side of whistleblowers and truth tellers. That's how progress is made. I had the history of the United States behind me for all of the faults and foibles. But I think the moment for me in which I actually felt the loneliest, where I was probably at my lowest, was actually the day I resigned from NSA. Because I knew at that point that I was facing a very, very dark future, And as we would say, I was behind several 8-balls. And those shadows were extraordinarily long. And it was not clear in April of 2008, with this sword of Damocles hanging over me, that criminal charges no doubt would be ensuing at some point, and that I was actually entering a world that should be extraordinarily uncertain. I used to spend many, many days, the 1,000-yard or the 3-mile or the 10-kilometer stare into the distance, looking into that future. But I never actually thought that I would remain in the dark, that I would eventually get through it. I just didn't know at that time. And I knew that I would have to find the strength within myself, the integrity of who I was, the fact that I had taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and now I was actually defending the Constitution against my own government. I had is that young teenager growing up in the 1970s. That was my civic awakening. There have been many people in world history who I look to for inspiration. Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., Benjamin Franklin. There were key people who I looked to. Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He actually lived in Cavendish, Vermont when I was growing up in Vermont. And the Vermonters fiercely protected him from any and all outsiders because he deserved his privacy. He deserved to be who he was. Leave him alone.
Sur un plan beaucoup plus politique maintenant.
So now let's talk more politics. So, if I were to be an enemy of the United States and I look at everything that's been happening, there's two trains of thought. So either I think, all these whistleblowers finally, are weakening the US of A. I mean, just as well because I'm an enemy of the US of A. But at the same time, I think, wow, their democracy is incredible. It's fantastic. I mean, they can talk, they can get into trouble, but at least they can express themselves. So again, if you were on the other side, those who don't like the United States of America. So, this question is for all three of you.
I think some people see this movie and they can't believe that it's gotten that bad in the United States because they try to keep us quiet, and they actually, in a number of cases, do succeed in keeping us quiet because Chelsea Manning cannot talk to you right now and won't be able to. Jeffrey Sterling, I predict, is going to go to jail for decades. So in some way, they've succeeded. But the fact that I never would have predicted in representing whistleblowers that they would turn into these political activists and civil libertarians standing up for our democracy. And all of them have become these very passionate, outspoken advocates, even though we belong to different political parties and have different religions and different affiliations. I think that is a testament to the fact, I think Edward Snowden is a kind of a counter narrative to Chelsea Manning, because even though he's in Russia, he's speaking to you last night. He's speaking out almost every day. He's giving a public speech. Even while John was in jail, it modeled after Martin Luther King, he wrote letters from Loretto and published them about what it was like being in jail and about the war on whistleblowers. So that makes me hopeful. I still do feel like it is a negative trajectory that we're on if we continue this path in what I consider to be a greater war on information, specifically information the US government doesn't like in terms of going after journalists and whistleblowers and hacktivists.
John Kiriakou, je reviens vers vous parce que dans le film, on voit que vous parlez de
John Kiriakou, I mean, so,
nous qui vivons dans l'idée que tous ces
living with the idea that all these terrorists who've been arrested are, important people. You said he was crying all day. I mean, is this the thing you shouldn't have been said?
Well, the truth of the matter is that most of the people that we had imprisoned in places like Guantanamo were actually innocent civilians who had been turned over to American troops because we were paying bounties. And so many Afghans, if they had a dispute with their neighbor, they would turn the neighbor into the CIA or into the U.S. Military and say, this is a terrorist, and they would collect $150. That's wrong. Just like a disrespect for human rights is wrong. The United States every year demands that all of its embassies publish what's called a human rights report for every country in the world. Well, who are we to criticize other countries at this point over their human rights practices if we don't respect human rights? We shouldn't even have to have a discussion about human rights. We should automatically respect human rights because we're Americans. And that's just not the case today. It's something that we really need to fight for.
Oui, Tom Drake veut ajouter quelque chose.
Yes, Tom Drake, you wish to add something? Yes, go ahead.
No, I'm just, the moment here, I really feel, because it's Geneva. And as a military officer, I was bound to ensure that the Geneva Conventions were never violated, including by our own government and our own military. Geneva, and I've only been here a little over a day, it's already an extraordinarily special place. It's really the center on this globe of human rights. And I can't begin to tell you, and it's very emotional for me right now, knowing that John is with us. It's the first time that the three of us have been together, even though John's coming remotely, and knowing that John is free, he's inside his home, he's free, he's out of prison. What does it mean to be free? What does it mean to express who you are? What does it mean to love one another? What does it mean to create? What does it mean to associate? All of these things are intrinsic to our human beingness. The ability to exercise that one to another across the entire globe with this extraordinary variety and the diversity of what it means to be human. It's a moment for me, and here it's Geneva, and this is where it all comes together. Those policies, international laws, those accords, those who have said they're signatories, it all comes together here, and that's why I've dedicated the rest of my life, that inspiration of what has been created in Geneva and continues to sustain itself on behalf of all humanity, why I've dedicated the rest of my life to defending life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those extraordinary words you saw in the Declaration of Independence. That's not just for Americans. That's for every human being on planet Earth.
Mais puisque nous sommes à Genève,
since we are in Geneva, we're in Switzerland, I'd like to ask someone who's a lawyer a very precise question about Switzerland.
Quelqu'un qui part avec un fichier d'une banque,
leaves a bank
qui va
with a
à
file,
l'étranger,
who goes abroad,
qui agit pour des
and
raisons
who
qui lui sont personnelles.
acts for personal reasons.
Est-ce que cette personne, mais je vous pose la question,
I'm asking you the question,
mérite le titre de
does that
lanceur
person
d'alerte?
deserve the name of whistleblower?
Est-ce que quand il y a de l'argent impliqué, on est un vrai lanceur?
Are we then a real whistleblower?
Well, under the United States definition, a whistleblower is someone who reveals fraud, waste, abuse, illegality, or danger to public health and safety. There have been whistleblowers, bank whistleblowers in the United States. Not only do they protect the bank whistleblowers, but they end up paying them a financial reward. In terms of Hervé Falcon, I don't...
Hervé Falconi, on va le citer, son nom est public.
He seems like a controversial character. It's unclear to me. I'm not sure what his motivations were. When I watched an interview on 60 Minutes, he said, I just want to get paid for what I did. And to me, an element of whistleblowing is that you reveal information of wrongdoing or malfeasance because it's in the public interest and the public has a right to know.
Et quand un certain Birkenfeld qui fait la prison aux
certain
États-Unis,
Birkenfeld who's serving a prison sentence in America gets more than $100 million. I mean, should we consider him as a whistleblower?
I think Brad Birkenfeld did, when he blew the whistle before he went public in any kind of way, he did blow the whistle internally at UBS through their whistleblower policies, and then he did go to both the IRS and the SEC with a tax attorney to talk about the fact that UBS had claimed to shut down its program in the Americas and had not. I do consider Brad Birkenfeld a whistleblower. He did, in fact, go to prison for about the same period of time as John. And then because he happens to be a banking whistleblower, strangely, in the United States, we pay out financial rewards to whistleblowers from the banking industry. Whistleblowers in the corporate industry have more protection, and the people who have absolutely no protection are whistleblowers in the national security and intelligence communities.
Il avait un bon avocat, Birkenfeld?
Did he have a good lawyer?
Yes, he had good lawyers.
Aucun de vous trois n'a touché 100 millions de dollars?
So did any of you three get $100 million?
Rassurez-nous.
Kind of reassure us. Did you get paid $100 million? Any of the three of you?
Bien. Au fond,
No, but I blew the whistle on billions in fraud.
oui. Au fond, maintenant, qu'est-ce que,
in fact,
au niveau, je dirais, de vos
So,
carrières
let's talk about
respectives, c'est
your
important pour nous de
respective
savoir où
careers.
vous
It's
allez.
important
On
for
a
us
vu
to know,
les ennuis
where you're going. I mean,
que vous pouvez connaître
we
et que vous pourrez
understood
encore
the
connaître.
problems you encountered, the
Je voudrais
problems
demander à
you
John
may be
Kiriakou
facing
et
up. And I'd like to
Thomas
ask
Drake.
John Kiriakou and Thomas Drake,
Professionnellement,
from
l'un
a
d'entre
professional
vous dit dans le
standpoint,
film,
one of
I
you in the
miss
film
my
is
work.
heard saying, I miss my work.
Ce travail me manque.
So,
Est-ce que
I
le
miss my
travail à
work.
vous deux vous
So
manque
to both of you,
encore quelque part sur un plan strictement
are you missing
professionnel?
your work? We're talking about strictly professionally
John, on
speaking.
commence par vous.
John, we'll start with you, John.
Well, I haven't worked an honest day in 3 years. I've not been able to really find a job other than what you saw in the film, stocking shelves at an arts and crafts store. So I miss any work. I very much look forward to going back to work, which I hope to do in the coming couple of weeks.
Et vous, Thomas Drake? On voit dans le film, vous nous expliquez que
Thomas
pour un
Drake, in the
salaire
film, you said,
4 fois moins élevé,
a
travailler
salary
chez Apple.
4 times less than what you were paid, you were working for Apple.
But Apple's an extraordinary company. I don't talk much about it. It's an American success story.
Est-ce qu'ils ont peur des lanceurs d'alerte potentiels qui travaillent chez eux?
Are they afraid of potential whistleblowers who may be working with them?
No, Apple's incredibly supportive. They knew in the deepest, darkest hours, when I was facing 35 years in prison, they knew at the highest levels of Apple, including Steve Jobs at that time, before he passed away, they never wavered in their support. In fact, the Apple store where I work in Bethesda Row, Maryland, was a safe haven for me.
Alors ça, c'était la partie facile pour vous trois, mais
Okay, that
maintenant,
was, the easy
le
part
public
for the
qui
three
va
of you.
vous
Now,
livrer
it's
un certain nombre de
the audience
leçons,
that's
de
going
questions.
to
Alors
be
pour que tout le
putting
monde
questions
entende
to you
bien,
so that
et
everybody can
notamment,
hear clearly,
John
and
Kiriakou.
especially John
C'est bien parce qu'au moins,
Kiriakou. So
John
it's good
Kiriakou,
because,
on sait qu'il est
John,
5 heures chez vous,
we
5h01
know
exactement. Vous
exactly,
voyez, je ne travaille pas
it's
ni pour la
5
NSA ni
p.m.,
pour la
I
CIA,
don't
mais
work
je
for
vois
the
là
NSA or
dans
the
votre
CIA,
horloge.
but I know, on the
Donc
clock that's
attendez
behind you that it's
qu'il y ait un
5:01
micro, parce
p.m.
qu'autrement on est
Let's-
obligé de faire répéter. Alors,
Okay.
je vois mal
So I
les
can't
micros.
see,
Ils sont
so I'm
où?
looking at those people who have their hands
Ils sont-
raised to
voilà.
put questions to you.
Alors, on va commencer
Okay,
par
so we're
monsieur
gonna
qui est
start
là
with
à
the
droite
gentleman
avec
who's
le
there on the
pull-over
right,
violet.
with the purple
Je le dis pour John Kiriakou,
pullover.
hein,
I'm
la
saying this
salle
for
est
John
comble
Kiriakou.
ici.
We have a full
Il y a
house
plus
this evening,
Et
and
c'est
not
comme ça tous
one
les soirs dans ce
empty seat.
festival. Je crois que
And it's
les
been
gens
the
sont
case
très
in this
intéressés.
festival. I think people
Vous
are
avez un
really
micro,
interested.
je vous laisse la parole.
So, okay,
Allez-y.
you have the mic.
Can you
Go
hear me?
for it.
Yes. So, question for Mr. Drake. What are you doing now professionally? Are you still working for Apple? And what are you doing as an activist? And also then for John, what do you hope to do as an activist? Are you linked to any particular association, or do you hope to be working on your own as an advisor or whatever? What are your,
I'd still work at Apple. I'm an expert there. Extraordinary place to work. I work with amazing people and sell amazing products, okay? That's by virtue of how many people in the world are buying, okay? I'm also pursuing a PhD in the next couple of years. I'll be done with it. I'm at the dissertation stage now. And it turns out, it took a while to sort it all through, but I'm actually looking, it's an autoethnographic study about what happens to individual privacy versus state secrecy. And it's through the prism of my own criminal case. I have sought other work. I'm radioactive in the government. It's one of the prices that I've paid. I'm still in severe debt. It's to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. there is an extraordinary price, but I'm free. And so when I said I dedicated the rest of my life to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that's the activism that I have taken on. That's where I'm standing for all of humanity for the rest of my life here on Earth. It's that important because that's what matters the most. And will also continue to speak out as powerful as I can in terms of what's at stake for those who would dare usurp the sovereign power of our own individuality and our own human beingness. And you know, history's not kind. I think that the arc of justice, as Martin Luther King so eloquently said many years ago, does bend toward justice. I'm just going to keep hopping up and down on it.
John, same question to you, la même question pour vous.
So,
Qu'est-ce
John,
que vous
same
aimeriez
question
faire
for you.
professionnellement?
What would you like to do from a professional standpoint?
Well, this has been a life-changing experience. And I will spend the rest of my life fighting not for justice for myself. I've finished my case. It's water under the bridge. But for human rights and justice for others. I was offered a job recently at a progressive liberal think tank in Washington called the Institute for Policy Studies. And they've offered me a platform from which I can speak and write and teach and talk about all of these issues that you've so eloquently talked about tonight. That's what I would like to do.
Merci.
Like Tom Drake, I should also add too, like Tom Drake, I owe my attorneys almost $1 million. I doubt I'll ever be able to pay my attorneys, but I'm going to have to pay them something. So I have to begin chipping into that too.
I represented them for free.
That's right. That's right.
Allez, on continue.
Okay,
il se fait tard. Question, monsieur, vous êtes debout, allez-y.
Yes,
Voilà, merci. Gérard Scheller, je fais partie de l'association Attac. On a l'impression, en voyant ce film, non seulement que vous essayez de dire la vérité, c'est difficile, mais aussi qu'il y a de la vérité qui est cachée. J'aimerais savoir si à travers votre travail, vous arrivez un petit peu à démasquer quelle vérité on nous cache vraiment. Parce que finalement, c'est ça ce qui serait important de pouvoir savoir. Alors, quelle vérité? Moi, j'ai une petite hypothèse. Hein. C'est on dépeint le monde dans certains gouvernements comme étant finalement les bons et les méchants. Et on a trouvé les méchants actuels. Hein. Il y avait l'Union soviétique avant. Maintenant, les méchants actuels, c'est le monde arabe. C'est les musulmans, etc. Est-ce que ça serait mauvais d'affirmer que c'est utile au gouvernement d'avoir dépeint les bons et les méchants de cette façon?
The good guys and the bad guys in exactly that way.
Do you want to answer that?
It's a dynamic of politics and history and being more than a passing student that it's very convenient for government to find an enemy. Just read the writings of the very first president of the United States, George Washington, and James Madison, and using that as the excuse for why you have to engage in the kind of policies we've seen post 9/11. I'm well aware that there are risks and threats to civil society, but we don't have to give up essential democracy in whatever form it occurs and wherever it grows, and sacrifice that for the sake of security. That somehow fear and control, which is the predilections of power, over us. I absolutely resist that. And I don't believe most people, okay, in terms of power, seek it, but those who are in power, the temptations are extraordinarily great. I was at very senior levels in the government. I saw what happened to people in power, and it goes to their head. And then they enjoy having rule and authority and control over others.
Je vois qu'on n'a pas la liaison avec John Kiriakou, mais s'il nous entend, en tout cas, je veux lui dire merci.
Again, we've lost John Kiriakou, but I mean, if he can hear us, we want to thank him for having participated to the debate.
De bonne humeur.
Also,
encore une question, allez-y.
Maintaining a really serene mood.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Geneva, and I'd like to say that I'm from Bethesda, so I know your neighborhood. But I've been out of the country maybe too long, been out of the U.S. for too long, because I had the impression that in America, Americans have less and less confidence in what their government is telling them, whether it's the executive, whether it's the legislature, whether it's the Supreme Court. And yet in this film, it looks like everybody is bought into a terrorist behind every bush. The media is in fact replaying the government's case against the whistleblowers. Isn't somebody standing up? I know the Wall Street Journal is not a fan of Obama. Why would they not come in for your support, or have they maybe bought into the whole terrorist situation?
You know, it's been interesting. First of all, there's a huge degree of fear-mongering. So whenever things kind of simmer down and we start to find our way back to some kind of democratic normalcy, then suddenly we have the Boston bombing or Charlie Hebdo or the Danish attacks. And suddenly it's like, oh, we need more surveillance and we need to be afraid of the next terrorist attack. And every other week we have the FBI discovering a plot that it manufactured, it paid for, and it found some usually mentally unstable, usually young, often Muslim person to carry out, and then pats itself on the back for thwarting terrorism. So I think the problem is that after 9/11, a lot of the checks and balances that the United States is predicated upon broke down. So you had an executive branch acting with expanded authority. You had a Congress that was complicit and compliant, and in addition to being lied to by the government agencies it oversees. And you had a judicial branch that would not hear cases because the government would come in and say, we can't adjudicate that, it's a state secret. And then you have the press, who a lot of them are behaving like government lapdogs rather than government watchdogs. And a lot of them are just literally writing articles that are the talking points put out by the government, which is more propaganda than investigative journalism. So I think we need to strengthen the parts of our government that have been weakened over the last decade and strengthen investigative journalism and fund it and look at alternative journalism and adversarial journalism too.
On va prendre encore 2 questions parce qu'il se fait tard.
We're going to take 2 more questions because it's getting late. There was a gentleman over there, yes.
Je sais qu'il y a beaucoup de questions.
I know that a lot of people want to ask questions, but a question I'd like to ask you is, do you think, that nowadays in the USA, I mean, is there something that reminds you of the McCarthyism, the beginning of the 50s? Does that ring bells at all?
Yes.
Ils veulent tous répondre.
Very much so. Yeah, communism was the great threat. There was a red under every bed, behind every lamppost and every tree, whipping up. You had, the House Un-American Activities Committee. So it was one of those periods in history where we were looking for the enemy within, and now because of this external threat, it was like this black and white world. I think partly what happened, that national security apparatus, that fear-based structure was a social structure that became institutionalized. That never actually went away after the end of the Cold War. And even though I was very much a participant in the Cold War, I was stationed in Europe, I flew on RC-135s, East Germany was the country in which I actually listened in on, right, as part of that. And then that wall came down. That national security state, that infrastructure never went away. And it spent the next decade trying to find who that next enemy was. I used to have colleagues who were opining for the old days of the Cold War because it was so much simpler. I've always considered that a 45-year aberration in terms of human history. And then 9/11 happened.
Terrorism is the new communism.
Encore une dernière question.
Last question.
Last
question.
Voilà, je vous vois mal. Allez-y.
I can't see you.
Vous allez avoir un micro dans pas
you will
longtemps.
Receive a microphone in a few minutes.
Voilà, un peu plus loin, au milieu de l'allée, c'est simple. Voilà. Ce sera la dernière question parce qu'après, il est
going to be the last question because it's already late and we want somebody.
Allez-y, je vous en prie.
Moi, en voyant le film, je me place en Suisse. Je trouve que la Suisse n'est déjà pas une démocratie, c'est une pseudo-démocratie où le peuple peut choisir, mais après il y a des lobbies, des groupes de pression. Et finalement, on adapte très mal les lois. On n'écoute même pas le peuple, on essaie de modifier.
Ça, c'est pas une question.
Oui, il y a beaucoup de... Non, c'est pas la question.
Mais ce serait mieux de poser la question dans les
temps
que vous voulez.
Je vais vous poser la question. J'y arrive. Alors, je disais que la Suisse est une pseudo-démocratie et j'ai l'impression de rien rencontrer comme démocratie en Amérique. Et puis, comme disait Coluche, la dictature ferme ta gueule, la démocratie cause toujours. Et j'ai l'impression qu'en Amérique, ça ressemble vraiment, comme on venait de dire, au macartisme. Il n'y a plus rien du tout de démocratie. En Suisse, il en reste un peu.
Bon, on va toujours causer un petit peu, hein. On ne va pas fermer, si vous voyez ce que je veux dire. Donc, je vais demander à John Kiriakou qu'est-ce qu'il pense effectivement de... et c'est un constat que vous faites, qu'il y a peut-être un déficit de démocratie ici et là. Est-ce qu'on peut comparer un déficit de démocratie en Suisse, aux États-Unis? Est-ce qu'il y a des dangers de déficit de démocratie aussi?
Are you at risk being lacking of democracy also in America?
Well, I think in many ways we do lack democracy in America. And I think, at least in my view, is that our elected officials lack accountability. There are so many things in our own experience that are important to us. As Tom Drake eloquently said, we all took oaths to uphold the Constitution and to protect the Constitution from enemies both within the country and without. But if we don't have the support of our elected officials in doing so, we can't, and the country is doomed. And then that's the end of democracy. I feel, at least on issues of civil liberties and human rights, we don't have that protection that a real democracy would afford. And it frightens me.
Maybe the Constitution is actually in a very secure vault somewhere in Switzerland, waiting for someone to come and reclaim it. Just maybe, okay? That would be a news story. Look, it was a grand experiment that was launched over 220 years ago. And that's what it was, a grand experiment. There were no guarantees. For me, it's the very first words in the preamble to the United States Constitution that not just apply to the United States, but also to the rest of the world. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. I wouldn't even be here in Geneva if I didn't think that we, the people, mattered and that we couldn't form a more perfect union.
Merci à nos invités. Merci John Kiriakou là-bas, en Virginie. Merci à vous, tout le public, d'être fidèle à ce festival. Et merci à l'organisation du FIFDH pour nous avoir permis de discuter, d'évoluer et je l'espère en tout cas d'avoir appris un certain nombre de choses. Merci à vous tous. Bonne nuit à tout le monde.
Thank you. Good night.